I'm Will Reuter, and this is HBA After Hours, a podcast from the Home Builders Association of Greater Kansas City. Welcome again to another episode of the HBA After Hours podcast, produced by your local Home Builders Association of Greater Kansas City. As always, I'm your host, Will Reuter, the Executive Vice President here at the KCHBA, and with me today is...
your co-host, Keith Sauro, the publisher of Design KC and the Real Estate Book and New Home Guide, and once again, here we are.
Absolutely, Keith. It's great to be back with you. Tell the folks who's bringing today's episode to us.
Today is brought to you by Mead Lumber and North American Savings Bank. Thank you very much, guys, for helping us out.
Great American companies and great KCHBA members. Appreciate your support. We've got a great conversation for you today, a name that's probably recognizable to you if you've consumed anything related to housing or development information in the Kansas City metro at any point in time over the last 20 years, and that is Kevin Klinkenberg. Kevin, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Kevin, what would you like our listeners to know a little bit about you, kind of how you're situated in the building and development market, why you would get an invite to be on the HBA After Hours
and your
podcast?
crazy life.
That is a good question. No, it's a long and weird and winding road. I'm originally an architect. That's what I went to college for, and I worked as an architect for a long time, and I had my own architecture and planning firm for about a decade.
And we worked at Kansas City Homes and Gardens.
We did.
That's
right.
I knew.
And I worked with a lot of home builders and developers in that era, 2000 to 2010. Just did a ton of involvement with the Home Builders Association, had a bunch of great clients we did projects with. We had a real focus on doing kind of unique communities that were built around walkability. And so our first major client here was David Gale. We master planned the new Longview project in Lee Summit.
Beautiful project.
Thanks. And we designed a bunch of the homes for that as well in the first phase. And then we went on and did a number of other things here and all across the country. And then I left town for a little while, went and lived in Savannah, Georgia for about 9 years, came back in 2019. And since January of 2020, I have been leading a nonprofit called Midtown KC Now, which manages some community improvement districts in the Midtown area of Kansas City, Missouri. And we also get very involved with trying to help build and develop that part of the city. So we're very involved with trying to advocate for good policy and trying to help developers and builders and just help improve the area. And then, because that's not enough for me, I dabble. As you mentioned, I have a podcast that I do most every week, not every week, but most weeks. It's called the Messy City Podcast. Yep. A lot of building and development and planning people on that. And then I like to dabble myself in a little bit of design and development still. And so I have one project that I recently built with a couple of partners in the Columbus Park neighborhood in Kansas City, Missouri, that is a mixture of apartments and townhomes. So some for sale, some for rent.
Yeah, so. And for any listeners out there, you'll have seen that project kind of come to fruition through the Kansas City Business Journal. And for those of you that have been up to Garozzo's and have been up to Columbus Park, it's a really cool part of town. And to bring new housing options to an area like that is a really cool.
They actually they paint the fire hydrants in the Italian color flag, just like they do in Boston. Actually,
really cool.
They do that.
It is pretty cool.
That's right. It is cool.
Well, Kevin, you've done a couple of stints now in KC.
Yeah.
And, just like everything, there are generations, there are layers to this stuff. How would you describe our housing situation, our development situation in Kansas City? And given the fact that you've worked all over the country and done projects of every stripe, tell us some of the unique things about this place we call KC.
Well, I mean, I think on the plus side, I don't think we've ever had as much positive national or international attention on Kansas City in my lifetime. It's incredible. Just between everything with the Chiefs and then the movies, the Jason Sudeikis of the world, and all who the international attention is remarkable. And that's pretty cool. And
there's always Taylor Swift.
There's Taylor Swift as well. That's right.
And the wedding.
My kids won't let me forget Taylor Swift. So, so that's really cool. And I really feel like that has translated into growth into the region. So the region is growing. People are moving here. They're seeing the benefits that I think a lot of us have seen for our whole lifetime and the things that we loved about Kansas City. I always used to tell people, who didn't live here that, not just that it was a cool city and a hidden gem, but this is one of those places where you could work, have a good paying job and have an affordable lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And as a result, you could live a really good life here that is, in my opinion, was better than a lot of the high cost markets on the coast or other places. And so I think more and more people have realized that, and all the attention has been pretty cool. So from a region, I think it's great. But as you all well know, the housing market's very localized. Right. And within the region. And so there are some places that are going gangbusters and growing quite a bit. And then there are other places that are pretty stagnant. So it's varies a lot by city, and then even kind of neighborhood by neighborhood within those cities.
When they talk about the greater Kansas City area, aren't they still saying in the news and everywhere that we're one of the most livable cities? Is that still following around?
Think so.
I feel like I've seen that recently.
Yeah, I think we're always still ranked pretty highly in terms of just overall quality of life.
And do you think that's partially because, we'll hopefully never see this again, I don't think we will, but 2008, 2009, it took us a while to feel it. Yeah. Whereas the coast felt it very quickly, and it just seems like it comes from the outside in. Yeah,
I mean, I think the hallmark of our economy it's always been very diverse in terms of the business makeup of the economy. We're not terribly dominated by any one industry. And so as the economy changes, we're able to kind of change with it. And we've just had really slow, steady growth for a lot of years. And that's actually a great place to be. I'd much rather be in that scenario than even the Nashvilles of the world or the Austins that have boomed. Right. It just feels better, frankly, to be in a market that's growing, but kind of growing steadily.
And as to piggyback on Will's question, as you say, it's very segmented. Yeah. Where are some of the areas that you see the struggles in Kansas City versus others that maybe are booming?
Well, I mean, there's definitely a lot of parts of the urban core that are really struggling right now. There are some of the older suburbs that have seen some rough times. The part of town that I live in and spend most of my time in is sort of the midtown, downtown, urban core area. And I think we had a really solid run from the 2000s to about 2019. Mm-hmm. And since then, it's just been really tough. Yeah. We've been in a tough place the last few years. Whereas I think a lot of the growth continues on the edge of the city. My dad grew up in Baser, Kansas. Sure. When Baser was like 600 people, and it was like a nothing, dusty little town that none of us ever wanted to go visit, like our grandparents in, because we were like, "Whoa, there's nothing there. Right. What are we gonna do?" And now it's just booming.
People are fighting for land out there.
Yeah. Now it's become one of the real growing suburbs, frankly, of the area. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of communities like that on the fringe, Gardner, Edgerton, Spring Hill area in Johnson County really growing a lot, DeSoto. And then on the Missouri side, you've got, some of the Belton, Raymore areas, Pleasant Hill a little bit that are growing. So there are those stories. Lee Summit has been booming like crazy on the Missouri side. So there are a lot of good growth stories, but we've got a lot of work to do in the urban core to try to capture our percentage of it.
And I think, the home building industry, the development industry, they recognize not only the need to redevelop what has been developed for decades, but some of the ways that they were developed originally make it much more difficult to redevelop them with today's economic circumstances, with the regulatory requirements related to the building code, and just some of those design elements. And so, what do we need to do as a society to get more comfortable with seeing redevelopment as the healthiest part, the healthiest thing we can do for a city? It's essentially, how do we regenerate the momentum that has occurred over the decades? Because there's no perpetual self-sustaining, life cycle of anything. Right. It's got to be regenerated and rejuvenated at some point. So, how do we get out of our own way to allow ourselves, and where these industry guys that are looking around saying, gosh, I'd love to get in there and work on the east side of Kansas City, Missouri. That's where the need is. That's where the opportunity is. I just don't know my entry point. I don't know my access point. How do they jump in there?
It's the $1 million question.
Yeah, it's more than that. It's billions in opportunity and need, frankly, in those places. And then and then from the existing neighborhoods, what are they looking for? And then overarching it all, who are the rule setters that are in place that are saying you can do this and you can't do this, and go figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. That is like it's the $1 million question, I think. And there's a lot in there. I think it kind of starts with a lot of it is just like changing a mindset that people have. And over the years, there's been just so much of a rise of skepticism of growth, which is odd. Because I used to always say, like, your place is either growing or it's dying. So choose wisely. And we have a lot of folks, even in our established neighborhoods, that really resist change and growth of any kind. And I always like to point out to them, like, one of the funny things, like the part of town that we're in. So in the Midtown area where we are, which is generally like between Crown Center and the Plaza, say State Line to Troost, I think a lot of people would consider that that's like the nice part of the city, of the urban core.
Okay.
Well, in 1950, which was the peak population year for the census in that part of town. In 1950, there were 73,000 people that lived in that area. In 2020, there were 28,000.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
So it's a 2/3 population loss in that time frame. And some of that is attributable to smaller household sizes, but the majority of it is attributable to housing that has been torn down.
And not replaced.
And
by
not
anything.
replaced.
Yeah.
And so I would like to try to remind people that part of the city is actually built to have substantially more people living in it than what are there today. That's the DNA of that part of town. And the east side is the same way. That the urban core of Kansas City in 1950 had just shy of 500,000 people in it. And it probably easily had capacity for about double that, to be frank. Based on the infrastructure, you could probably easily fit a city of 1 million people in that area. Now that's less than 250,000 in that area. And the only reason that Kansas City, Missouri's overall population growth is back up to 500,000 is because of all the growth north of the river, more or less. So part of it is like we've got to change a mentality to help people understand that growth is important. It's not just a good thing, it's important. Our places have to grow. We have to have an attitude that growth is a good thing, and we want people to move into the city, and we want things to get better, and that neighborhoods change whether you want them to change or not. They're going to change in some direction because the people in them change.
That's right.
Even a brand new subdivision in a suburban area, the people are going to get older. Their kids are going to move out of the house. Then what happens? And then you go through household cycle changes. This is just like part of the evolution of cities. And we have to understand that that's like a natural cycle. And that kind of actually goes to the whole topic of the messy city, which I have the podcast about, which is that every healthy city, there's a messiness to it. It's not perfect. You can't perfectly plan how everything is going to be. You have to accept that there's just a lot of things that are going to change, and that's okay. And you want them to change to the best that you can make them, but change is a part of life. And so that part of it is psychology, and then there's a big part of it, which I'm sure we'll talk about, which is just the regulatory apparatus. And is that actually then welcoming for development?
That's what I was just going to ask. So why aren't people going in, buying these city blocks that they can get for a song, fixing them all up, and renting them out?
There are some people who have taken chances in that area. You probably know some of those guys. And I think they're members and active here. And there are some people who really would like to do more. I would say there's actually there are more builders who are doing that today than there were 20 years ago.
Sure. I'm seeing that. On the artisan tour, for Christ's sake. Not right there in that area.
Right.
But,
so that's cool. But it's hard. It's really hard. And, as you know, there are really thin, tough margins in the home building business. And so every time you add one layer of challenge or risk to it, it's just going to peel off the certain people who want to bother doing it. So, to be candid, the thing that we talk about a lot in my day job and we talk about publicly with our elected officials is there's an aspect of this not related to home building, which is we have a public safety crisis in our city. And until we effectively deal with that, very few people are going to want to invest. That is like the neutron bomb that makes nobody want to be there if they don't feel safe in their communities, in their neighborhoods. And that has been a real problem the last 5 years or so in our city. So I think we are starting to have a better conversation on that. And we're starting to change some things and get them turn in the right direction. But that's foundational. We got to deal with that first.
That's right. That's the stuff that has to be done.
Right.
Everything else is extra.
Yeah. People will put up with a lot of stuff, but they're not going to put up long-term living in a place where they just don't feel safe. So we got to deal with that. And then there is a regulatory apparatus that is mostly local, but is mostly controlled by City Hall, that has been a problem and has gotten worse. And so we talk with our elected officials and our city staff a lot. There's some really smart people with good ideas, and I think people who are sympathetic. And there are people who pass ordinances that they think have the best of intentions, and they just don't understand like what the negative consequences are. They just don't understand the economics of it. And they don't understand that there are people who are, if you're in business, you're putting money at risk. That's the whole thing.
Right.
And you're putting money at risk because you want to make more money doing something. And people are willing to take risks. But then there comes a point.
There has to be a rainbow at the end of the thing.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
You gotta see it.
There has to be a return on the brain damage.
Right.
Yeah, right. Well, I think you said it there, Kevin, is that it's not that a lot of these ordinances or statutes are ill-intended. They're meant to address some type of community need or priority that's been identified. But if done haphazardly or without input from those who are ultimately going to be charged with complying with it, as to whether or not that is going to disqualify what they either had in the pipeline or something they intended to put on the pipeline. Because if you've got, just a rough estimate, 10 things you've got to comply with, it's not like pick 3 and you can ignore the rest.
Right.
But you got to check all 10 of those boxes, and then whatever is left at the end is what you can build. And 9 times out of 10, that's nothing for a lot of these things.
And we're in a weird place because, it's been 30 years or more now since we started doing development incentives in the city. And I know they have their controversy associated with them, the property tax abatements and other things. And I'm not going to say they're perfect, but it's been 30 years, so people have kind of forgotten why we did that originally. Mm-hmm. And a big part of why we did that is because even if it was a level playing field from like a zoning and regulatory status, it's still harder and more expensive to do stuff in the urban core because you've got 100-plus-year-old infrastructure you've got to deal with. Right. Let's say you buy some of those vacant lots, you start digging on them, and what you find are old foundations that were pushed into it. And now you got to spend $10,000 to excavate and then fill, so that you have a stable lot, which is really common. You have collapsed sewer lines that have to be replaced. There's just a lot of things that, and then maybe you're working in a situation where the lots are smaller and tighter, so your means and methods are a little different than how you build a house than if you have a larger lot. And all of that is a little more expensive, and we created these development incentives years ago to try to help offset some of that cost and make it more attractive for people to want to do business in the urban core. And, it's like we had a little taste of success for about 10 or 15 years, and then everybody forgot why we did that. Uh-huh. And I like to remind people, it's like, well, we had this really small area where we had some success, like little areas of like downtown and plaza and all that really did well, but most of the rest of the city still really struggling. And we need those incentives to really make a lot of those projects work.
If you're going to have that many things that you've got to comply with, if you're going to have, out of nobody's choice, this many variables to have to solve for, at the end of the day, everyone's got to have some skin in the game. Yeah. And so when you're talking about incentives, it's like, hey, the city's not going to pay for the project, but this is where their give is going to be in order to bring something that is going to be on a compounding aggregate basis, a net benefit to this area of town.
Yeah, and I'll just give you a very typical example. So the little project we're doing in Columbus Park, 10 apartments that we rented and 10 townhomes for sale. We sold a couple of them. I'd be happy to sell anybody a townhouse today if they want one. They're beautifully done.
Check the comments
They're
for
wonderful.
the direct line for the sales office.
The price might change depending on who the buyer is. So,
of course.
No, we've got a couple of them listed right now that I think one's at about $598. Okay. So they're really nice, 3-bedroom, 3.5 bath units. Anyway, but that project, our fixed price contract with the general contractor was $6.2 million. When we kind of looked at everything that we had to spend money on that was some sort of a requirement from one of the city departments, including a lot of really expensive underground stormwater storage we had to spend, it was just about $1 million of that 6.2.
Ooh.
It's crazy.
So
7 figures.
That's typical. Yeah. We had to build a new water line in the street to serve them, which means tearing up the street as well and then repaving the whole street. We had to rebuild an alley off that was a 150-year-old alley and make it 20 feet wide with concrete. New fire hydrants, a lot of stuff that were requirements that nobody was writing us a check for.
That's why I knew about the painted fire hydrant.
That's right.
Because Kevin paid for it. He's still got paint on his fingers from having just painted the fire hydrant.
We have a gorgeous fire hydrant right there.
Nicest fire hydrant.
Yeah, you'll love it. So, that may be on the higher side compared to a lot of people, but I know that, a lot of times if you're even going to just build a house, if you got to rebuild the sewer line to connect to the one in the street or the water line.
That's a lot.
It adds up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those quote unquote site costs are completely unforeseen and impossible to underwrite. Yeah. So it's like you want to do the project, get ready to stroke a check for it. Right. And it's a lottery ticket. Yeah. You don't know if it's going to pay off or not.
So, that's why I just, what we try to do is try to figure out ways to suggest ideas that could help in that manner. I interviewed one guy for the podcast who's in South Bend, Indiana. This interesting guy. He's a retired college professor, and he decided in his retirement to become a builder developer. He's an incredibly unlikely candidate to do this, but he's done it, and he's done a lot of really interesting stuff. But South Bend, Indiana had a policy where they would essentially reimburse people on infill lots to replace their water and sewer connections from the street. That's a real incentive.
Yeah.
That's a real incentive to housing construction because that takes a lot of risk out of the game of, oh my God, I might have to spend $25,000.
And think of the benefits they'll receive as a result once that home is up, once somebody's living there, the tax benefits, what else it could bring to town. So
the city
it's
gets
that domino.
Yeah, the city gets a bit of improved infrastructure and the developer gets predictability and
people get a great place to live.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And they can flush their toilet.
Yeah, which
and it doesn't just
that is no small deal.
It actually goes somewhere.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I don't care if it spins or not. I just need it out.
Just go away.
Just get it out.
It's got to spin the right way.
Right.
This one brought to you by the plumbers.
All of them. Yeah, well, that's really crazy.
So Kevin, you've been in the design world. You've been in the actual building and development side of things. You're as involved in the community as anybody can be. What are some of the gaps that exist between kind of what is being built and maybe what people want to see built? How do we bridge that?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. I just had a guy on the podcast, a guy I've known who's working for a builder now out in Utah. He's been on the development side his whole career. And we had a long conversation about housing types and demographic types. And this is kind of a long running conversation that I know we've had in the industry. When I used to come out here and give my little silly PowerPoint presentations about walkable communities and such, I would talk about, look, there are all these different demographics. So I always use an example, look at a car company like Toyota. How many different models of cars do they have? And when you look and add them all up, there were like 30 different models of new cars that are all targeted to a different buyer segment. How many different homes are we building? Like how many different segments are we really targeting? Now, I think the industry is much better about it now than it was 20 years ago. But 20 years ago, it felt like it was targeting like one or two segments, and that was it.
Yep. And there was enough people in those segments that everybody could make what they needed to.
Because we are seeing some clever things happen,
Right.
You know, with
slabs
and some inexpensive, new homes. And
but like
clever
the dominant household type now is a single person household.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And, that person probably doesn't want to live in a 4-bedroom house. But how many 2-bedroom houses are we building? Not very many. How many 1-bedroom houses, might we build? So I had just my whole career, I've been really fascinated by just different ways to do housing. So sometimes to my own detriment, but I'm really
very
fascinated.
Expensive hobby.
Yeah, it can be. But I've always found it interesting the unique ways that people come up with providing new types of housing. So I've designed cottage courts and which are sometimes for sale, sometimes for rent. Townhouse communities, duplex, fourplex types things, the sort of things that are like ubiquitous all over older neighborhoods. And you see a lot of mixture of types. So like I always tell people in my neighborhood, I live in the Volker neighborhood, the dominant housing type is still a single family house. That's probably 2/3 of all the lots in the neighborhood. But mixed in with that, there are all these other things that you can find. There are small apartment buildings, there are duplexes, there are some townhomes. There's just an interesting variety that happens in one neighborhood. And so I think in terms of like gaps in the market, I think there's still a lot of gaps related to just housing that is more tailored to the actual household types that we have, and also different clever ownership types. You can own up to a 4-unit building with a standard conventional mortgage. And so you could have a 4-plex with a conventional mortgage, own it, live in it, and rent out the other 3 units. And I did a couple versions of things like that over the years, and I try to be like an evangelist for that for people. What people call house hacking, because it's incredible the financial benefits to yourself.
Well, we you've heard me talk about this before. I grew up in East Boston, and our first kind of real house, because the first house we were in, we actually shared a restroom, believe it or not, with 3 other families in the hall.
Oh, yeah. I believe it.
The second house that we were in, we took the top 2 floors, and then we rented out the first floor. Lots of houses like that back east, where people have they're essentially like what you're talking about. There's 3 family homes,
like a triple decker.
But
you got to give it with a good Boston accent.
That's right. You got to park the car right in front, make sure you're all set. But that's it. No, but seriously, we don't see a lot of that here. People live in all 3 levels. They didn't quite arrange it that way.
Yeah.
But the 4-plex idea, that's amazing. But can you just build that anywhere? Probably not.
And that's one of the challenges. So if you get back to the regulatory side of things, that's an area where Kansas City, Missouri is getting better in terms of allowing that type of thing in more areas, at least in theory allowing it. There's still a lot of details to work out with like setbacks and different standards. But most communities don't allow that. So more and more cities are starting to look at it and trying to figure out how to be more flexible with their zoning codes. But in most communities, you're going to have to get a variance or a rezoning or something to do something like that.
Because that is a huge benefit. I mean, we would have never been able to afford that house had that apartment in the first floor apartment been taken.
The first house I bought was in the Valentine neighborhood. It was actually a really old house that had been converted to a triplex, so 1 unit per floor, just like that.
That's exactly what we're talking about.
When I bought it, and so I lived in 1 unit and rented out the other 2, and it paid the mortage.
That did.
And it was great. And it was incredible. It was like a young person that was incredible.
Yep.
And that allowed me to save money and then do something else down the line.
One of the things that I tell people is that look, the Home Builders Association, the members of the business development community, all of those, they don't make the market. they participate in a market that is largely created for them. And the regulatory apparatuses that exist are part of that market, whether people want it to be or not. And so my rebuttal to them is, oh, you guys only build X, Y, and Z, and it's all the way out there, and whatever, is that people will build what's allowed to be built, no matter where it is, as long as it's allowed to be built and there's a market for it.
Yes.
They will chase both of those things, and they will make it happen. So allow it to be built, because people are looking for different housing circumstances than they have in previous generations.
Yeah, try and rent a house right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Anywhere.
I know. So I mean, one of the things that when I have a chance to present to city planners, what I tell them is, if you want these different things to happen, what you have to think about is, how do you make it as easy as house flipping? So the reason we have such an active house flipping market in most cities is because in many cases, you don't even have to get a permit, right? It's just so easy. And there's a big supply of houses. You can buy them inexpensively, renovate them. Unless you're doing some major change, you probably don't need a permit, and then you sell it. And so there's very low barriers to doing it. Now try to do that. Now try to build a duplex or a triplex and do that. And you can't. And it's just the compounding layer of codes that make it hard. And most of those kinds of smaller scale stuff, they're not going to be done by big builders. They're going to be done by local people, local entrepreneurs, smaller builder developers, people who really care about their community, and they want to do some sort of investment that way. And they're not going to have the patience or the ability often, or the money, to get through some sort of long review process. So I should probably put a pitch in. My friend Abby Newsham, she actually has a local group that meets once a month called Small Developers of Kansas City, where it's people like that, and they're getting together once a month. They're trying to learn about these things, and they want to build stuff in the city, in the region. And there's a lot of excitement and energy with that group of people, but they're gonna gravitate toward, where is it easiest for me to get started?
Of course.
Who wouldn't?
Yeah.
Well,
You're trying to run a business.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, when you're learning to ride a bike, you got training wheels on first, and then
Correct.
you kick them off once you get comfortable with it. It's every expert was once a beginner in something,
right.
but it's financially fatal to make a big mistake in the housing space.
Yeah.
And when you see the experts not wanting to do it, that's when you know there's a real problem.
And the people that are involved in Abby's group, they're not the people that have necessarily profit as their only reason for going about it. There's an emotional tie. There is community pride. I'd like to have control over what my neighborhood looks like, so I'm going to take it in under my own hands, and I'm going to make it happen. And that's a beautiful thing, because that's how communities get built, or by the people that are living in them.
No doubt.
But if they get treated like a Fortune 500 company, and they've got to have development attorneys and just paying professional fees out the wazoo, forget it.
I'll go the other way.
Because they're not professional building and developers. They got a day job. They got their kids' soccer games. They can't forego all of those pleasures in life and those extracurriculars to do something like this. It's a really hard thing. So it's a blessing to have people in the community like Abby and that group that are giving people and equipping them
Every
with
tool they can.
at least an eyes wide open experience about what this is going to look like.
No doubt.
So that not everybody that shows up to a pitch is going to purchase. You get 10 people and one person, you get a lead. That's it. That's a good meeting. So you get 20 people in the room that are interested in this, and maybe it's not for 19 of them, but if somebody moves forward with something, it's worth it.
Yeah, exactly.
Brick by brick.
Yeah.
So how can the community, first question I have is, can you bring back the Grand Emporium? Do you remember the Grand Emporium?
I do remember the Grand Emporium.
It's one of my favorite places. I played in bands my whole life. We used to play there. I love that place.
Yeah, it was
That's
a
a side note.
great venue. Yeah.
Anyway, no, but what side note, right? But what can locals do to help? What can people living in that community do to help?
That's always, it's hard because a lot of what we're talking about is like inside baseball. It takes a certain amount of patience and time to understand all this. I think the first thing is to just be encouraging of the idea of your community growing. Like having an attitude that, this proposal down the street that somebody has, that could it's not like a negative. Oh, this could bring like, four new.
Not in my backyard. Right?
Yeah, this brings 4 new people to our neighborhood, and that could be really cool. And that's gonna be new customers for the businesses in our neighborhood, and better tax revenue for the community to help with whatever needs to be done. So to me, the attitude thing is a big part of it. And then secondly, any time that anybody has the ability to just kind of learn more about the building and developing industry, any possible way to do it is really great. Developers and builders, it's strange to me, but they get a bad reputation. Developers especially, everybody sees them as, they think all developers are
right. They show up with pitchchforks.
Yeah, they're like the guys with the $1,000 suits. And
they're
black
the movie
hats
villains.
Yeah, they're movie villains.
Watch a movie. Has a developer ever been
There's never
romantically portrayed?
No, never the good person
Right.
in a movie. But it's just like you said, they're just business people. Developers, and they're just business people, and they're just trying to provide something that everybody needs. Like society can't exist without people who are willing to build places for people to live or shop or work or whatever.
Let me ask you this: when you redeveloped New Longview,
Yeah,
give me 2 or 3 things that were thrown at you that you were surprised.
The interesting thing there was we thought we would have more of a battle with the neighboring subdivision than we ended up having. So
that was a plus.
Yeah, so it was a real plus. The neighboring subdivision, for the most part, really loved the idea of what we were doing and the whole rationale behind it. And then another positive thing that surprised us is when we did the first phase homes, and it was on the parade of homes, the foot traffic through those homes was unbelievable. I think somebody told us at the time it set a record for that weekend for anybody who'd come through those. And because we had always felt like there was a demand for that type of community.
It felt kind of like Waldo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I think we intuitively felt like there was a desire and a demand for that, but to actually see people come out in those kind of numbers and they liked it, that's pretty cool. And it, from the standpoint of being a planner, when I go back there now and 20 years later, and you see the parks being used and kids out playing, it's incredible to look at that sometimes and say, it's like, oh my God, this actually worked. This is really, really pretty awesome. There's a lot about that was really cool. It's also there's a lot of things that were really hard. Dave and his team had to work really hard to pull a lot of that off, and they formed their own home building company at one point. And
still has it, I believe.
Yeah, and there was a lot of
actually just built a friend's house recently.
Okay,
I loved it. Yeah.
But there was a lot of financial risk in doing a big project like that, so that's a big challenge. But it was a fun time.
Well done. It's a beautiful community, and every time I go there's something new still, which is great.
Yeah, something you said there, Kevin, about being able to go back and seeing the things that have been built actually being used for their intended purpose, and just being able to observe that. We've just done, I think, a poor job as an industry or as a building community to humanize housing.
Yeah.
Like when you talk about that empty lot that might be across the street from you, and you go to the planning commission to try to make sure nothing ever gets built on it, but you still want to complain about trash or whatever, but you want to make sure nothing gets built on it. You fight with City Hall, something gets built on it. Do you go over and step up on the porch and knock on the door and said, I tried not to get this house being built. You're not welcome here. No, you take over a plate of cookies because it's a family that moved in or somebody, that's just, if we can make that human element of housing more prevalent and, make it less of a commodity, less about numbers. It's always going to be those things, obviously, but we just have not been able to inject that human element into the pop culture of what housing has become, because it's probably the most prevalent conversation happening in a public policy space across the country.
Sure it is. And does it go back to just fear of change?
I think
people are just naturally afraid of change. I always used to say changes aren't permanent, but change is. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. And there's a lot of, it's just kind of our nature. It's like the devil versus the one you don't. And for a lot of people, even if they may be unhappy in their circumstance in their neighborhood, the idea that something about it might change creates a lot of fear.
Yeah.
Well, if our listeners took nothing else away from this conversation, it's that the Home Builders Association isn't the only voice out in the city that thinks there is an opportunity for some regulatory reform when it comes to housing.
There are many of us.
Many people are talking about this.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I think we could probably do a 10-part series on each of the nuances of things that are preventing housing, just in Kansas City, Missouri, but in every community, there's something out there, whether it's, what the building or energy efficiency requirements are, or how they structured the infill ordinance that prevents the outcomes that everyone wants, which is additional housing, from actually coming to fruition. Yeah. Those exist. And so I don't know if you have anything specific on those, Kevin, but I just wanted the listeners to know that, guys, there's a lot of work that needs to happen, but the work really starts with a greater level of prioritization within the community to address these things, because people are busy. They've got shorter attention spans because there's more stuff going on.
And there's tight, all of it.
More information availability than there's ever been. And so how do we cut through the noise and say, we hear you that housing is a priority, but how do you keep it a priority so that some of these other things that communities need to address don't drag housing down, but instead build it
Prop it up.
Literally.
Get rid of the oxymoron.
That's right.
We need affordable housing, but let's make it impossible to make it affordable.
Hey, did you call me a moron?
No, I said get rid of the
oxymoron.
Oh, okay. No. Absolutely not. That's great.
Well, I think we covered some really good ground, and again, appreciate Kevin Klinkenberg for being with us today. This has been the HBA After Hours podcast, produced by your local Home Builders Association of Greater Kansas City. If you'd like to have a question answered or a topic discovered on a future episode of our podcast, please visit kchba.org/podcast and leave that note for us. We'd also ask you to visit letbuildersbuildkc.com to find out how you, the average Kansas City resident, can plug into this housing discourse. Lots of information, education about how we can get housing built in our communities.